Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 1, entitled The Activities of Maharaj Priyavrata, text 39. Tasya
Shloka
Shahava iti shloka
Tasyaha Vayate Shloka
Priyavrata
Kritam
karma
Karma
Priyavrata kritam karma
Kritam Karma
ko kuryat vineshwaram
Vineshwaram
ko kuryat vineshwaram
Vineshwaram
yo nemi nimnayar
Akaroch
yo nemi nimnayar akaroch
Yom Nivim Narakaroch
chayam gnan sapta Varidin Chayam Gnan Sapta Varidin Tashahava iti shloka
Tasyaha Vayate Shloka
Priyavrata kritam karma
Yavrata Kritam Karma
Konu kurya vineshwaram
Kunukurya Vineshwaram
Yonemi nimnaya karot
Yonivim Narakaroch
Chayam Gnan Sapta Varidin
Yom Saptavaridim
Tashahava iti shloka
Tasyaha Vayate Shloka
Priyavrata kritam karma
Yavrata Kritam Karma
Konu kurya vineshwaram
Kunukurya Vineshwaram
Yonemi nimnaya karoch
Yonivim Narakaroch
Chayam Gnan Saptavaridin.
Yom Saptavaridim
Please chant.
Tasyaha Vayate Shloka Priyavrata Kritam Karma Kunukurya Vineshwaram Yom Nemi Narakaroch Shayam Gunam Saptavaridim Tasyaha Vayate Shloka Priyavrata Kritam Karma Kunukurya Vineshwaram Yoniminim Narakaroch Chayam Gunam Saptavaridim
Tasyaha Vayate Shloka
Tasyaha Vayate Shloka
Priyavrata Kritam Karma
Priyavrata Kritam Karma
Kunukurya
Vineshwaram
Yonemi Nimnaya Akaroch
Yoniminim Narakaroch
Chayam Gunam Saptavid
Chayam Gunam Saptavaridim
Mataji. Tashahava, sorry, Tasha
Tasya
has
Yes
Hava, certainly.
Iti
All these
Shloka
verses
Priyavrata Viking Priyavrata
Kritam
done Karma activities Ka who no then Kuryat can execute Vina without Ishwaram
the Supreme Personality of Godhead.
Supreme Personality of Godhead Ya
One
who
Nimi of the rim of the wheels of his chariot.
of the rim of the wheels of this chariot
Nimnai by the depressions.
Akarot made
Chayam
darkness
Gnan
dissipating
Sapta
7
Varidin
ocean
Translation. There are many famous verses regarding Maharaj Priyavrata's activities. No one but the Supreme Personality of Godhead could do what Maharaj Priyavrata has done. Maharaj Priyavrata dissipated the darkness of night, and with the ribs of his great chariot he excavated 7 oceans. Please repeat, there are many famous verses
There are many famous verses
regarding Maharaj Priyavrata's activities.
regarding Maharaj Priyavrata's activities.
No one but the Supreme Personality of Godhead
No one but the Supreme Personality of Godhead
could do what Maharaj Priyavrata has done.
could do what Maharaj Priyavrata has done.
Maharaj Priyavrata dissipated the darkness of night,
Maharaj Priyavrata dissipated the darkness of night,
and with the rims of his great chariot
and with the ribs of his great chariot
he excavated 7 oceans.
he excavated 7 oceans.
So Prabhupada's purport, there are many excellent verses famous all over the world concerning the activities of Maharaj Priyavrata. He is so celebrated that his activities are compared to those of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Sometimes a sincere servant and devotee of the Lord is also called Bhagavan. Sri Narada is called Bhagavan, and Lord Shiva and Vyasadeva are also sometimes called Bhagavan. This designation, Bhagavan, is sometimes conferred upon a devotee by the grace of the Lord, so that he will be very highly esteemed. Maharaj Priyavrata was such a devotee. Om again to Nanda Shya Gyanjanandakaya Chachurunatamina Tamashivema Samprodi Vacham Andalayate Gurjatrikatam Vande Shri Gurjataram Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare Hare. There are many famous verses regarding Maharaj Priyavrata's activities. No one but the Supreme Personality of Godhead could do what Maharaj Priyavrata has done. Maharaj Priyavrata dissipated the darkness of night, and with the rims of his great chariot he excavated 7 oceans. Interesting. Because the scientists say that at one time there was only one ocean. And of course they gave it a name, but of course they wouldn't have known what it was called. They just gave it a name. What was it call it? And there was one continent. Does anybody see it? It's called Oceania or something like that. So anyway, there's they seem to be in agreement that yes, there was only one continent, and they can show you almost like a jigsaw puzzle where the continents fit together. And that would actually go along with this here, so that, and it's not as if they've known this for a long, long time. It's only recently they discovered this, as in like, not last week or something, but not in the last 100 years. So whenever they discovered it, it wasn't back in the time when this was written, 5,000 years ago. It wasn't even in the time when Prabhupada did the translation back in the 60s or the 70s. They didn't even know at that point in time, they hadn't understood well enough. So gradually, bit by bit, the scientific evidence is very interesting. Krishna is very clever, and that the very thing which the demons try to utilize to deny God or destroy God is a very undoing of them. You see that in fairy tales and things like the evil queen or something, the very power she has is the undoing of her and things like that. So the advancement of the ability to understand eventually will lead to the fact that there is intelligence behind this creation. And these ancient Vedic literatures were saying these things thousands of years ago. Which, so if they were right about these things, then what about all the other things that they haven't understood yet? So here it's saying that Maharaj Priyavrata's chariot actually carved up the continents. So how did they know? If there wasn't global travel going on at that time, how did they know that there were various continents? Because in the Dark Ages or the Middle Ages, especially Western Europe, they didn't know what was on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. And in fact, it was actually an accident, wasn't it? They found the West Indies. They were sailing to India, and they came across what they thought was the land they were looking for, but they were totally way off course. They found the West Indies just off of America. And so whatever the history is, I may not be historically accurate, so that's not the point, but the point is that they were in ignorance where people thousands of years before were in much more knowledge. They had much more knowledge about even the global geography and topography of the planet. And just like someone who's ignorant, as soon as they get a little bit of knowledge, they start to postulate that nobody else knows this. And all they do is reveal their ignorance, actually. What was it? There's a saying that those who think they know everything are annoying to those of us who do. Of course, then that could be seen in many different ways as well. Perhaps that person who thinks like that is annoying to someone else as well. But I guess the thing is that to think that we know something is actually just foolishness. And to learn a little bit, it's like before we came to Krishna consciousness, we already thought we knew everything already. It's just like children, teenagers, when they get to a certain age, then their parents who were their heroes and who taught them everything, how to walk, talk, eat, toilet training, the simplest of things, send them to school, clothe them, looked after them. So it comes to a certain point where the teenage kids think, my parents don't know anything. They're just fools. They're totally out of touch. And then, after a little while, that teenager grows up and begins to realise that, well, perhaps they weren't so foolish after all, and then you realise that you were the fool. So this is the typical scenario which goes on in the world, generation after generation. It's part of life. So as soon as one which is teenage life and starts to see the world in a different way, because it's new to them, they think everyone else is a fool. Actually, all they do is reveal their own foolishness, and then people just have to tolerate them. So similarly, we should be careful not to do that in spiritual life, that we learn a little something, and then we start spouting it as if we're in knowledge, and that we forget how foolish and ignorant we've been, and we forget how foolish and ignorant we are still. Just like Srila Prabhupada was preaching to the devotees, he was preaching about impersonalism, and the devotee says, you keep speaking about these impersonalists, but we don't see any Mahibandis. Who are these impersonalists? He says, you are them. It's you. So what would be the symptoms of an impersonalist? Anybody?
An impersonalist is quite vague.
Vain?
Vague.
Vague.
And not accountable, irresponsible, and attracted to intoxication.
Okay, these are some different symptoms of an impersonalist. Someone who's vague, wants to be unaccountable, doesn't want to take personal responsibility. Anyone like that, anything? How would we see impersonalism manifesting in the Western world? They're maybe not sitting there saying that Krishna is a product of the modern material nature, they're maybe not saying that, but how can we understand impersonalism as underlying everything in the Western world? Anybody?
One thing that Prabhupada, I believe, mentions in Srimad Bhagavatam is that because of that impersonalism that promotes sex life, and over gratification on the senses, in a sense that if there is nothing beyond this world, only you merge and that's all, game over. And the only thing that you have is sense gratification in this world, so let's just get into it as much as possible.
So that impersonalism, that is basically a type of atheism as well, because like I told you, we've seen it's also unaccountable. They feel that there's no one they have to give an account to.
And also, teachers are saying that children can't maintain eye-to-eye contact. They're used to having their devices. So technology is reducing people's skills to communicate. They just text and message people. They can't cope with direct personal interaction, so they're reducing their social skills by technology.
It's a fact. And what's happening is that in the so-called educational systems, people are not being inspired to develop their natural tendencies and natural talents. They're just being given a choice of what to do to fit in to a certain system. So therefore, nobody's recognizing what are the qualities, what are the skills or traits, the leanings of this person. So therefore people are dissatisfied, they're doing something just to get money, to gratify their senses, just to make ends meet, to have a roof over their head. And they're having to work so hard, and finally at the end, hopefully they get to retire. And retirement means they just want to forget it all. Yeah, so the fact that they're not being given the opportunity to develop that individuality. Sometimes when non-devotees see the devotees dressed in tilak, dhoti, kurta, sari, they think, oh, you guys are all brainwashed because you all look the same. But what they don't know is they've never spent a day living at the temple to see how these devotees who may appear to dress the same are so much individuals. Their freedom of individuality is there because they're not chained to the same brainwashed things which the non-devotees are. They're not chained to sex life, they're not chained to the telephone or to the television, they're not chained to intoxication, they're not chained to horrible ugra karma activities because of their unrestricted activities. Because of the unrestricted senses, then there's things like meat eating, abortion, these things are going on just simply as a result of uncontrolled senses. So this type of brainwashing is very inauspicious. But Prabhupada says regarding the brainwashing of the devotees, yes, I am scrubbing their brains clean. So in this way, although externally devotees may appear sometimes to be dressed similar, but you never see any of them looking the same. Everyone's even expressing within the limits of devotional dress, which is propagating simple living, high thinking. And how does it do that? So take, for example, a dhoti. You get basically one size of dhoti. Unless you're extra tall, then sometimes you get another size. So there's perhaps two sizes of dhotis. Fits everybody. And it's simply made out of cotton. Whereas people are suffering in sweatshops. People are having to work in factories which they hate, just to get money to make ends meet, to buy modern conveniences to make life easier, so it gives them more time to work in the factory. Simply so that someone can make some money, and then they bring out, so you maybe take a pair of jeans, for example, and because it's got a certain logo on it, then it's 80 quid. And then if it's got a supermarket logo, it's £8. And the material's probably not much different, it might even be the same, cut from the same cloth, but it's a different design cut on it. And because it says in the Bhagavatam that this is the world, in Kali Yuga it's the world of names. The material world is like that, especially in Kali Yuga. So you give something a name, it gives it some importance, that is marketing. So we should be careful not to be sucked into these things and giving it more importance than it is. We have to see things in relation to their use in devotional service. And of course, what's doing here, what's going on in the Western world is that people's desires are being, the material desires are being fanned, they've been fueled and they're being fanned to the extent of ridiculousness. Just like on the subject of jeans, we were talking the other day, because our Victor Felix had a very interesting style of torn trousers, and we're saying this could be modelled, it could be marketed, and people will probably buy it. And there are things like jeans which have been ripped up by a Siberian tiger and selling for hundreds of pounds. And people think, well, this is cool, you know, it's got teeth marks, and it's like, it's ridiculous. It means that people have got more time on their hands than they know what to do with, and they've got more money than sense. And they're missing out a very valuable thing of human form of life, which is for self-realization. Our old friend and God brother Guru Bihari the other day he said something very interesting, wise and humorous. He says that some people are so poor that all they have is money. And people think that is the goal of life, let's just accumulate and accumulate so that we can enjoy here. Because they're not thinking beyond this life. And even they don't even want to take the opportunity to think of the question, is there life beyond this life? So this Maharaj Priyavrata, he was likened to the Supreme Personality of Godhead because his activities were not normal activities. They were wonderful activities, can't be imitated by the common man. So similarly, we have our own Srila Prabhupada and we have our own spiritual masters, and we cannot imitate them, but we follow in their footsteps and try to do something according to their desire, according to their instruction. And this week we can be associated with them. In the material world, everything is temporary, so we have many famous people, and people who were famous 40, 50 years ago. So many people don't even know them nowadays. They've never heard of them. And if they do hear them, they think, that guy was a joke. The fame doesn't stand very much. But the fame of the devotee is eternal. It is never diminished. So, Yadhyadacharati Shri has Tatadeva Tavanjanahasya Praman Kruti Lokas Tadanivartate. Whatever a great man performs, whatever actions he does by exemplary acts, the whole world pursues. So people, they want to imitate some famous footballer, but there was a famous footballer before them that they never knew about. Or they want to imitate some famous singer. And I was in someone's house last year, and they had this program on called X Factor. And they were doing auditions for it. And it was really sad actually, because some people had told their son or their daughter or their brother or whatever that, oh yeah, you've got a good voice, you should apply for this. And they're going to apply it and they can't sing to save themselves. You know, if their life depended on it, then they would be executed. They couldn't sing to save themselves, but they're there. And obviously you can see by the looks of it, they spent a lot of time in front of the mirror with their hairbrush, imitating, you know, their favourite singer. And they try to sing some song, they can't sing in tune, they're out of time, and you know, their appearance looks like a bag of spuds, and they just don't have it, that X factor, whatever that is. And then the people who are judging them are so cruel. But in one sense, they're being cruel to be kind because they're smashing their ego that they have some dream that they can be something, but some of them have got such ego that they don't even believe the judges. So the material world is very cruel. It can make us deluded into thinking that we're something that we're not. And we simply embarrass ourselves in the material world. Even as a devotee, we have to be careful not to fall into the false ego that because we've learned a few slokas, or we've read a few books, or we've done a bit of devotional service, now I'm somebody of great importance. You know, the great examples like our own spiritual masters and founder Acharya, they don't speak like that. They're always considering themselves to be foolish. Why we're in the material world in the first place means that we're foolish. We're foolish to leave Krishna's service and come to the material world. And even Krishna saying, don't go, we'll say, no, I'll be okay, I'll be right back. Therefore Lord Chaitanya comes to wake us up and remind us, you know, what are you doing here? Just like King Indra, he was cursed to take birth as a hog, and he had his wife and little hoglets, and they were having fun in the mud, doing what hogs do, and he became attached to it, and he felt very responsible. And when Narada Muni came to tell him that, okay, it's time to come back now, your curse is over, it's time to come back to the high planetary systems, he says, how can I leave? I have my responsibilities, I have my wife and my children. He said, you'll get cut, just come, leave it all behind. But he'd become attached to that. So this is the amazing capability of the soul, that we can tolerate any situation. We can tolerate being an insect. We can tolerate being a hog. So if we can tolerate these things, then surely we can tolerate whatever life is, challenges or opponents facing us now, in order to become a pure devotee again. And sometimes our devotees do a drama called Krishna's Benediction, where Narada Muni visits Lord Narayan, and the Lord gives him a benediction that whoever you meet, you just tell them they can come back, and you can bring them back straight away. So this is the Lord. The Lord is not bound. It's not like he made some rule and then he has to stick by that rule himself. He makes rules and he can break them, he can change them. And this is an interesting thing, the scientists talk about various laws, but Prabhupada points out, well, who's the lawmaker? When is there ever a law without a lawmaker? So a law means that there's some order behind it. So anyway, the benediction was given, and the person who Narada Muni chose says, yes, come back tomorrow. I just have to ask my wife if she's okay with it. Of course she wasn't. And cut a long story short, and then he missed out on the opportunity. So we shouldn't be like that as well. We're on the threshold of eternity, and the mind might want to draw us back into the cesspool of material life, but don't let it happen. Don't give up on it. Because all that will happen is you become disappointed out there, disappointed in the material world. Now, whether we're living in the temple or where we're living out, it's a matter of where we let our mind go. So we have to keep on redirecting our mind to Krishna. And this way, when we keep on directing our mind to Krishna, we overcome our conditioning, because Krishna is the supreme pure, he is the most intelligent, and he has all good qualities. So when you associate more with the reservoir of all good qualities, then they start to shine through us as well. And one of those qualities is humility. Even Krishna is humble. The West, going back to the impersonal thing, is the underlying general interpretation of God in the Western world is an impersonalistic idea. And this was decided upon like about 1500 years ago, when the early Christian philosophers started to decide how it was going to be basically propagated. And there was arguments about the conception of God, and the impersonalistic concept prevailed. So when they tried to impose some personalistic concept of God as being a person, then because they think of God as being the origin of all and the oldest, then he has to look like an old man, which means he's subject to aging. So how can that be God? But we understand very clearly by the verse of Prabhupada's books, as Krishna is Navayovana, he's eternally youthful, he's not subject to any laws of old age, birth, death, old age and disease. So their understanding of God in the Western world is just totally absent of any real knowledge. Now it's good that they have a concept that there is a supreme being, and they may elaborate on their misguided conclusions, but it doesn't make it any more true. It doesn't make it any more intelligent. It just becomes an elaborate illusion. And Srila Prabhupada said that this impersonal aspect of God is actually considered the last snare of Maya, where the living entity tries to enjoy separately from Krishna in the material world, struggling for so long, and finally we think, I'm done with this, and it's so much troublesome having to compete against everybody all the time. Even if you become the greatest emperor, if there's someone with an army just ready to attack you and take it off you because someone else is similarly ambitious. And this is history, has repeated itself many times. Millions of people die simply because of one person's ambition. So this is a material world for you. It's nothing to do with God. God says, just come out of here. You know, it's just like when you were young, your parents says, oh, don't hang out with those kids, they're bad, they'll get you in trouble, and you think, nah, no better. And then what happens? You get brought back to the house with the police, or else you get into a fight and you get hurt, or so many things where you get tricked into doing something wrong, and you get yourself in trouble. So Krishna's like that. He's like a loving parent who's saying, you know, don't go in this direction, it's not going to lead to happiness. It's false. And if you come back to me, then you can enjoy eternal bliss and full knowledge of your original position. So in the material world is set up for the purpose of enjoying separately from Krishna, but because constitutionally we cannot. This is constitutionally the hand cannot survive without feeding the stomach. If there's no food goes into the stomach, the hand cannot survive. If we don't water the root of the tree cannot survive. So Krishna is the root and Krishna is the stomach. If we satisfy the root, then the whole tree is satisfied. So when we satisfy Krishna, then we automatically become satisfied without even trying. But because Prabhupada says we become frustrated with trying to be a person in the material world, we become frustrated with the competition for supremacy in the material world, and we just want to merge. We want to give up personality. It's easier just like when we have so much trouble, we just want to shut off from it. People take to intoxication, or they work hard to retire early because they just want to get out of the rat race. But actually, there's always going to be a struggle in the material world. If we're not struggling to get out of the material world, we'll be simply struggling with the mind and senses to stay afloat. And that won't be actually happiness. So therefore, just as the various illusions and attractions for the mind and the senses in the material world are just a variety of products of Maya, material energy, and similarly, the personal aspect of God, although it is spiritual and it's above the material world, and on the eternal and subject of the eternal relation of the Jiva Atma to the Supreme Soul, then it's not our eternal constitutional position, and therefore Prabhupada said it's the last snare of Maya that we think finally that I am God, I become God. And Srila Prabhupada refers to that as spiritual suicide. And then there are some people who just think that whatever we think of, then that is what the truth is. Which is a very, very dangerous thing. We see that, and particularly there's one very prominent world leader at the moment that he thinks just because he says something that it's true. Now it says in the Shastra that when a Brahmin speaks, he speaks the truth. Whatever he says will come true because he always speaks the truth. But not some person whose mind and senses is out of control, that they just say something and it becomes true just because they believe in it. You know, that's like the mind of a 3-year-old, isn't it? Very dangerous. So this is the nature of people with uncontrolled mind, uncontrolled senses, and Prabhupada says that you cannot trust a person whose mind and senses are not under control. So therefore, we have to trust Shastra, because even at this point in time, we cannot trust our own mind. When we're out of control, we can't trust that knows what's best for us. So therefore, Guru, Sadhu and Shastra. And this is all available to us by the mercy of Srila Prabhupada and his disciples, who undertook so much great austerities in order to make this knowledge available for us. So we shouldn't think, great, now I've got it, utilize this, and that's me, I'm off back to Godhead. That's only half of it. But even that won't work unless we take upon the means of achieving the mercy, which is that we have to give out the mercy in order for that mercy to come. So we have to do two things. We have to try to understand what is this Krishna consciousness, and we have to apply it, and then we have to give it to others, and that way it becomes full circle of realization. Without part of that, then it is not complete. If we simply just read, we simply just take in the theory without practicing, then it will just become a good idea, or it may just seem like something out of reach. But actually, Srila Prabhupada shows in so many ways that Krishna consciousness is very simple. We're doing something, we just do it for Krishna. Just to make it as an offering to Krishna. All that you do, all that you give away, as well as all the austerities that you perform, should be done as an offering to me. And Krishna is saying, if you do that, then you become free from material bondage. So we simply have to train our mind to connect everything to Krishna, and that is called Bhakti Yoga. So the theory has to be there. If we just simply try to do the practice without the theory, we'll forget why we're doing it. We'll lose interest. We'll just compare it to some material, mundane activity. Just like Raghunath Maharaj, he was instructed to go to New Vrindavan. And because Prabhupada instructed him to go there, then his thing was that if his authorities told him to dig a hole and fill it back in, he would do it all day long, day after day, because in his mind, this is what Prabhupada wanted him to do. So of course, such a valuable devotee has got more to offer than digging holes and fill them in. But the point was that he's prepared, because of the order of the spiritual master, then even though he's such a capable devotee, his first sense of duty was to fulfill the order of the spiritual master. And we see that he did that, and he's such a successful, wonderful preacher. So of course it doesn't mean to say everyone who digs a hole is going to become a sannyasi and spiritual master, traveling around the world making thousands of disciples. But the point is to follow the footsteps, not to imitate. Following footsteps means that we take the essence of what is being taught and we put that in practice. The principle, take the principle. So the principle there is staying safe under the protection of the instruction of the spiritual master. So Prabhupada says to preach Krishna consciousness, then we have to, there's two things required, that is knowing the philosophy and purity, and that purity comes from practicing it. So there's another interesting saying is that we should practice what we preach, and we should preach what we practice. So in that way, both of these things feed each other. When we preach what we practice, and we live what we practice, then we actually start to realize deeper and deeper the meaning of what we're practicing. And then the same book that you read the first day you walked into the temple is the same book you'll be reading the day before you go back to Godhead, and it'll be saying so much more to you. Anyone got any questions or comments? Yes.
So I was just wondering, you're referring to the mind being scrubbed. Prabhupada says we're brainwashing, so the mind is being scrubbed. And then also towards the end you're saying the mind needs to be trained. And I was just wondering, when we speak about scrubbing the mind, does that include the heart and the ego and the intelligence? And what is the scrubbing process? Is it just that we follow the general program of sadhana, or do we need additional information and techniques in dealing with the mind and controlling it?
Sure, Swami says that we accept everything which is favourable for advancing Krishna consciousness and reject anything which is unfavourable. So yeah, we can follow the general things like Prabhupada says. We should chant 16 rounds on beats every day minimum and unlimited off the beats. So it's not like, okay, we should only chant 16 rounds. If you chant any more, that's unnecessary. At the same time, Prabhupada was not in favour of devotees simply chanting 64 rounds and not doing any service. And there's examples of that while he was physically on the planet. So we should, as we get older, then we want to utilise our time more and more. And from day one, actually, we should be just trying to utilise our time more in Krishna service. And if we try to do that, we'll see Krishna will show us so many opportunities. I remember when I did one of my best days on Sankirtan, this book distribution in Aberdeen many years ago. And even though it was my best day, I actually became aware of how much I was spacing out. And even though I was so much more engaged. And this is nature of devotional service. The more you become Krishna conscious, you may be doing so much more, but then you become aware of how much time you're wasting still. Not like, wow, I'm just doing an amazing amount today and couldn't be better. You'll never get any better than that. That's just a fool talking like that. You know, Krishna shows you that what you can do in a amount of time. Look what Prabhupada did in 11 years. Therefore, it mentions in the Nectar of Devotion, Srimad Bhagavatam mentions that a pure devotee never likes to remain idle. And I think it was back in 1987, I decided that I wanted to just read the Srimad Bhagavatam and get through it all. So I just carried the Bhagavatam with me wherever I went. Whenever I got a minute or two, I had it out. And within a year, just by filling in any gaps of time that I had, then I'd read the whole Bhagavatam. And then you begin to see, also we used to chant, here at Srimad, we used to chant 21 rounds a day. And then on the Kadishis we chant 25, and sometimes some devotees would get selected to chant 64 on top of that. So, and you begin to realise that when you chant 25 rounds a day, you always find a way to fit them in, and even then we're doing so much more service. So of course you can take it to the material platforms, you know, we were younger then, and then we just resign it to like a material thing, but actually spiritual energy is what carries it. It's like Prabhupada wasn't a young man, and look what he did. Tribhuvannath, before he passed away, he was doing so much service, he wasn't a young man. And even one devotee, I remember Tulsinath Das was telling me, because he was very much inspired by Tribhuvannath. And Tribhuvannath had an amazing energy, always enthusiasm. He was practically like enthusiasm personified. And the devotees sometimes try to emulate him, and he says, don't, you should be careful not to try to copy me, he says, because he says, you have a hard job keeping up with me. He says, I'm running off a different energy. So he was letting the devotees into a little secret there. So there is a different energy. If we assign our ability to offer service simply based on our material limitations, then it will stay limited. But if we want to go beyond those limits, Krishna can do anything. If we have faith that Krishna can do anything with us, that's fine. But if we want to restrict it, then that's a long process. Anything else? What was your original question again?
Yeah, I was just wondering, I guess we had in classes by Bhakti by Maharaj about the mind, but there's a hierarchy of the mind. There's the way that you feel, which predetermines how you're going to think. We generally think of thinking, feeling, and willing, but it's more like feeling, thinking, and willing. So when we're talking about scrubbing the mind clean, does that mean we could bypass the mind and go straight to how we feel? Because the mind distorts the way we feel. Like you maybe the original desire was, the need was that you were trying to do the job nicely. So that doesn't need scrubbed. That's fine, you know. So when we're talking about scrubbing, I'm just wondering, does the heart itself, or wherever the feelings and emotions come from, are they okay? And it just gets messed up when it gets refracted through the mind.
So Prabhupada gave some nice lessons on that. If we go by feelings, there was one question came to Prabhupada. This was in 26 Second Avenue in one chap up. He stood up and says, I don't think I have to bow down to anyone. I don't think anyone has to bow down to me. I feel that we're all more or less equal. Prabhupada says, you're feeling wrongly. So someone may feel like something, but they may feel wrongly. So, for example, we may feel something based on something we've heard. Say someone, Chinese whispers, they say to us, oh, this person said this about you, and then you feel bad towards them. And then you hear, actually, that's not correct. You were misinformed, and then your feelings change. So it's not wise to go by feelings. On the platform of pure devotional service, that might be a different thing, but as we're not at that platform yet, it's a very dangerous thing to go by feelings, because we may be feeling wrongly. Just like at Bhaktivedanta Manor once, there's one man got up and he went and sat on the asana which was put aside for the devotee to give class, and he wouldn't move because his mind had told him that he should just sit on it. And the devotee was sitting there waiting for class to happen, and this new crazy guest gets up and sits on the asana. And so people can do it. When people, they listen to their mind and they think it's the voice of God telling them to kill someone, so it can go to all sorts of dangerous extremes. Therefore, we listen to Guru Sadhu and Shastra. If the mind says the same as Guru Sadhu and Shastra, then that's fine. And then, even though we may feel like something, we overcome the mind by acting according to Guru Sadhu and Shastra, regardless of how we feel. It's like sometimes we may be in a very fearful situation, but we carry on doing our service and then we overcome that fear. Or we might be, even if we're thinking like we want to, it's like many examples of devotees who are serving Srila Prabhupada really wanted to please him, and Prabhupada would chastise them. And from an outside point of view, someone would think, or may think, well, that's a bit unfair, the person's trying to serve you and you're chastising them, but why is he chastising them? Anybody?
Because he loves them.
Mm-hmm. And why is he chastising them out of love? What's he doing?
To help them improve.
Yeah, he's training them. He's training them to serve Krishna. Because not just because they think, there's ways to serve Krishna, there's things to do and what not to do. He's trying to make them aware of how to serve properly. So then the love is tested. If you really, like the disciple, want to love Prabhupada, and then Prabhupada says, your service is substandard, they could take the huff and say, oh well, fine, I'm not giving you anything. But then if they really want to serve, they say, okay, well, how do I serve properly? But if we let our false ego get in the way and say, oh well, fine, I'm not going to do anything for you. And so that's the challenge we face, is that even though we may be trying to serve to please, if that's the situation, are we willing to surrender our false ego to please, or we still want to hang on to that? Like the example, the spiritual master asks for a cup of water, and the disciple brings him milk. The disciple and the spiritual master says, what's this? Ask for water. And the disciple could say, well, fine, get it yourself. But that wouldn't be what maybe the spiritual master hasn't said is perhaps he's got jaundice or some other disease and he can't take milk. But because the false ego is so deep, we don't like to be corrected. And even if we think we're trying to please, then that's what, if we are trying to please, then we have to see what is the lesson in it, so I can learn how to please. It's not that we just simply and very quickly arrive at a platform of knowing how to do that, because then how are we going to actually learn how to operate in the spiritual world? Therefore, the spiritual master trains his disciples so that they actually can say, Krishna, here's a nice devotee for you. Okay, anything else we can finish? And But actually, just to finish, it is a positive note because we're leaving behind our false ego. So Bhakti Thakur says that there's only two things of substance in the material world, and that is the jiva and the holy name. So anything else which gets in between that is something we want to shed. And sometimes the shedding of these loads, because we're attached to them, we identify with them, it may be painful. But it's just like when you go to the dentist, it may be painful getting the job done. When you get it done, and you can carry on as normal again without pain, without discomfort, and without any distraction. Just finish there. It's wandering with the key.
Prana